Hey, good afternoon. Today we are going to look at how to work with layers in Photoshop. Using layers is probably one of the most important things that you can do in Photoshop because it gives you lots of flexibility in your editing. And in today's lesson, you're going to open up two files. One is called start02.psd. The other one is called clock. And we're going to start on our Start02 image, and we notice that there are three layers inside this image, and only one of them is visible because we don't have the visibility icons, which look like eyeballs, on that are turned on. So we're going to click on the background layer. That's going to activate our background layer. I know that layer is selected because you'll see that it's highlighted, looks different than the other two. Let's go back to our clock layer, and we want to select all of the white area outside of the clock. So I'm going to get my magic wand because this is a solid color. It'll be an easy selection. I want to make sure that contiguous is turned on because I want to get only the white pixels on the outside. If contiguous was turned off, it would also get the white pixels inside the numbers and inside the ring of the clock. So I'm going to click right there. So that selected everything that is white. Basically, it selected everything but the clock. Now, in this particular lesson, we want to invert that selection, so we're flip-flopping the selection. So I'm going to do Control, Shift, and the I key. And when I do Control, Shift, I, now it flip-flopped the selection, so now I only have the clock selected. I'm going to press the V key on my keyboard to get move, and with my move tool selected, I'm going to click inside this clock. I'm going to drag it up to the top tab. Now you'll notice that when my cursor hits that tab, the other document is opened up, and so I'm going to bring my cursor back down here and let go, and now the clock should appear on the screen. Because we had selected our background layer earlier, the clock layer will always appear above whatever is the currently active layer. So that's why it put it right there above background. We want to name this, so we're going to double click on the word layer 1. And we want to name it something that is relevant so that we know what is inside that layer. We're going to choose clock. Now, I've moved my layers panel over here inside my work area to make it a little bit easier to see. You can undock yours by clicking on the tab that says layers and drag it over into your work area. These little previews of what's in each layer are called thumbnails, and if it's really difficult to see what's inside your thumbnail, you can either right-click in this open area where there's no layers and choose large thumbnails, or you can go up to the menu down to panel options and you can choose large thumbnails from there. Generally, I like to make my thumbnails pretty big if I'm working with just a few layers. If you've got a lot of layers, it does not make sense to have big previews because it makes things a little bit harder to see. Now we're going to turn on the two other layers that are inside my document, and I notice that there is a stacking order. So the order in which they appear in the layers panel also indicates how they appear on your canvas. I want to rearrange these so that my clock layer is on top. What I do is I put my cursor on top of that layer. In the layers panel, you have a finger right now, but as you click and drag the mouse, the handle or the mouse is going to turn into like a little fist as if it's holding on to something. When I drag it up, the blue line is going to indicate where the new layer will go. I want it to go to the very top, and then I let go, and now I see that my clock is on top. The next thing that we want to do is we want to change the opacity of the clock layer. Opacity means the visibility of the layer. If it's 100% opaque, that means I cannot see through it. If it is if it's 0%, that means it is completely transparent. Somewhere in between would give us different levels of that layer showing through. So we want to start with a 50% opacity layer. You can either drag the cursor out here on the word opacity and it will change. You can type in the number, or you can drop down and drag the slider here. There's different ways of doing that. The next thing that we're going to talk about are blending modes, and I know this is going really fast. I'm trying to cover a lot of information in a short video. Blending modes have to do with more than one layer, and it's the way that one layer affects and works with the layer below it. So here I'm on the clock layer, so whatever I do with my blending mode in the clock layer will show how it's going to interact with the gauge layer. Okay, so I'm going to drop down. My blending mode is located on top of my layers panel, and the default is normal. So let's try some different blending modes. First, let's click on dissolve. You'll see that it dissolves that top clock. Then let's try darken. That gives it another look. You can actually use the down arrow keys on your keyboard to go through the different looks you have available. So I always tell students maybe try difference and darken just to see how those look. You'll notice that some of them make major changes and others are very subtle. The one that we want to stop on is going to be called screen, and that makes my layer really, really transparent. And because it dropped the transparency so much of that layer, let's bring our opacity back to 90%. And then I'm going to press enter so it commits that 90%. The next thing I want to do is go back to my move tool, and we want to move this clock down to the lower part of the image. I want to make it so that the edge of the clock is touching the right side of the canvas, and the 3 and the 9 are split, and the little dot in between the two clock handles or watch handles is there at the bottom of the screen. Now the next thing is I want to make some adjustments, but I want them to affect more than one layer. I want to make some adjustments that will affect the clock and the bearing. So I'm going to hold down my control key, and I'm going to click on the clock and the bearing. The reason I did control is because those two layers are not touching each other in consecutive stacking order, and so in order to skip the gauge, I hold down control. Now at the bottom of the layers panel, I have a link layers option, so I'm going to click on that. And you'll see that when I do that, two little chain links will appear. So if I move my cursor around, or I move my objects, both of them will move at the same time. I want to free transform this, so I'm going to Control T. And I'm going to drag the bounding box, and as you drag the bounding box, you're going to see that you get a percentage that pops up in that little black box. I want to drag it to 5%. If you're having difficulty dragging the mouse or getting exact measurements, you can come up here to the options bar and type in 5, I said percent, should actually be degrees. We're going to do 5 degrees here, and we're going to press our commit. Now if I want to resize it again, I can Control T, and I'm going to resize just a little bit. I think I want to go ahead and just turn mine a little bit more, and I'm going to pull it up because if you notice that the top part of the bearing isn't showing, so I'm going to push it up so we get the illusion that it was a full circle, and I'm going to press enter or do the check mark on my screen. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to click the background layer. Anytime that we add a new layer, the new layer, like I said earlier, will always come up above whatever layer is currently selected. I want to get a new layer by clicking on the new layer button at the lower corner of the screen, so I click that, and I'm going to rename this layer, and we're going to call it gradient. Okay, and so a gradient basically is kind of like a tie-dye. It's a transition or a blend between two colors or one color and transparency. The keyboard command to get your gradient tool is G. G is gradient on the toolbar here, and you'll notice that on your gradients up here at the top, the very first one that will come up by default is called a linear gradient. That means that the color transition will follow either a diagonal line, a straight line up and down, straight line side to side, but it will follow a path that goes straight. The next thing you're going to see is, depending on which version of Photoshop you have, you may see these gradients pop up here, or in this case you may get a long list of gradients. Now the one that we want to choose today is a little bit special, a little bit different, so I want to show you how you can load additional gradients. If you're using an older tutorial that used a previous version of Photoshop, you'll have to do this next method. You're going to go to Window, Gradient, and over here, let me pull my gradients panel over. Over here, you may see some previews, but if you don't, you'll probably see a list that looks similar to this. Every panel that we have will have a menu option up here in the top right corner. We're going to click on that, and then we're going to go down to Legacy Gradients. When you load the legacy gradients, let me make this screen a little bit bigger. When you load a legacy gradient, they will always appear at the very bottom, so I'm going to click on that. And again, you get another list of different types of gradients that you can choose. I want to click on Legacy Default Gradients, so I'm going to click there. And I want to do one that is a foreground to transparent color. So purple happens to be my foreground color right now, which is actually what I'm going to use, but I want to click on foreground to transparent. It doesn't matter what your foreground color is at the moment. So I selected that. Now if I need to update or customize a gradient, if I click inside this box up here at the top of my options bar, let me show you what I did there just one more time. If I click inside, not on the drop down, but I click inside, now I have a preview box that shows me it's foreground to transparent. And if I need to change that color, I can double click on this color stop and I can choose a color to use. Let's use the RGB numbers 76, 33, and 126. That's these three numbers right here. I'm going to press OK, and I do want it to go foreground to transparent, so the transparency will be represented by the checkerboard right here. I'm going to press OK, and so I see that that gradient popped up. Now, another way to do this, if for some reason things aren't working your way or you're using an old Photoshop, is if you click the new layer and we're on this gradient tool, you can drag and create the line. I'm going to turn the visibility off of that one. In whichever direction you want it to go. Let me undo for just a second. Control Z, Control Z. So I'm going to turn the visibility off on this. So wherever I draw my line will start in a solid color and it's going to end in transparent. So what I want to do on this one, by default it automatically created a gradient. It tried to assume what I wanted to do. But what I want to do is I want to go from the right margin of the screen over to the left. So I click and I drag, and so my gradient will appear solid purple on the right side and transparent on the left. Now I don't want it to be actually solid purple, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the opacity to 60%. So that now I can see some of those keys showing through my gradient. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some text. So I'm going to click on my type layer. I'm going to choose horizontal type tool, which should be the default one that pops up. And I want to choose some settings here on my screen. So in the original instructions it called for a Helvetica sans serif image or sans serif font. I want to choose impact instead, and I'm going to make it 70 points. So we know it's going to be just under an inch in letters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the upper left corner of my screen, and I'm going to turn my caps lock on, so I've got a capital Z 2000. Now my font is going to be purple right now because that's what my foreground color was. After I type my letters, I'm going to highlight it. And what I want to do is I want to change the color of this text. And so my color change is actually up here on the options bar. I'm going to click inside that purple. And what I want to do is I want to come down here inside one of the rings on my bearing. And you can see the one that I'm pointing at right now on the screen. If I click on that, it's going to change my font to match the exact color in those bearings. Okay, that's a lot of stuff right now, and so what we want to do next is we want to add, well, first of all, we want to commit the text, so I'm going to do the check mark. I always suggest using a check mark instead of enter when you're doing text so that it doesn't accidentally go to another line. Now I'm going to click the FX option at the bottom of my toolbar, and I'm going to choose bevel and emboss. Okay, my bevel and emboss settings, here we go. So for the let's see, for the highlight, let's see here on my settings. I want to choose bevel and emboss. I want to come out here and do outer bevel. I want my highlight technique to be, well, let's come down here and change this first. Let's do screen, and let's choose kind of a lighter blue color. Okay, the color I'm choosing is 48222-242. I'm going to click there. So that's my screen setting, and I'm going to drop the opacity of my screen down to 20% right there. And then my shadow is going to be multiply. It's going to stay black, and I want to lower that to 40%. Okay, so let's see here. I want to make sure that up is selected in my directions. I want my angle to be 120. And let's see, what else can we do here? Let's change our depth size to, let's do 5 on it, and then let's do 5 on our soften as well. So we've got a lot of changes going on here. We're going to press OK. And so it doesn't look like there's a whole lot that goes on right here. If we zoomed in, you'd be able to see that the letters look a little bit puffy. Now, I want to edit the text. The easiest way to edit the text is to double click on this T thumbnail. So I 2 clicks. Whoops, 2 clicks. And so something's going on with my computer. I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to do 999. So I changed the 2000 to 999. And I'm going to change the point size of this font now to 90 because I have fewer digits in there. So you'll see that when I changed it to 90, it did not change because I didn't have that text highlighted. So let's go back and do 90. And so now because the text is highlighted and I press the check mark, it'll make it slightly bigger, and now it is in there as 90 points. So what we want to do next is we want to save this as a copy. So we'll go to File, Save As. You're going to name it Your Name Keyboard.psd. You want to keep it as a PSD so it keeps layers. And then after you name it that, you're going to go to File, Export, Quick Export as a PNG. You don't have to rename it. The name will stay the same. It'll just change the extension and the file type to a PNG. Anyway, that is all you have to do for the layer lesson.